We've waited 13 long years for this since Texas A&M ran to the SEC. Lone Star Showdown Saturday night. The Texas Longhorns, the Texas A&M Aggies. Texas will beat Texas A&M on Saturday night to secure their spot in the SEC championship and the college football playoffs.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The return of the Lone Star Showdown. Oh, my Lord, it is giving me chills just saying that. Texas Longhorns, the Texas A&M Aggies on Saturday night in Kyle Field. Jonathan Davis from Locked On Longhorns, Andrew Stefaniak from Locked On Aggies here to talk about one of the biggest rivalry games in college sports, one of the biggest football games of the season. Still a lot to play for the Texas A&M Aggies and a lot to play for the Texas Longhorns. SEC championship implications, college football playoff implications. The entire world will have their eyes on Texas A&M on Saturday night. 118 matchups between these two storied programs, and they played every year from 1915 to 2011. Then, of course, Texas A&M, like Texas fans like to say, ran to the SEC. And now Texas has followed them to the SEC, and they play once again on Saturday night. Before we get into the football matchup, Andrew, I want to ask you, how old were you? Where were you the last time that these two teams played in November 2011?
I was 11. So I was not very old, which is why I think like a lot of our players for A&M and for Texas, I'm learning about this rivalry. Obviously, I watched it. I enjoyed it. I understood it. But when you're 11, you don't quite get it. Same, I think, as like I said, the players for both teams. So this is just going to be – it's going to be a real awakening for some of these players and people like myself who have been fans for a while now but haven't quite seen it as adults. It's going to be exciting.
Yeah, I don't think it'll take long if the players haven't already grasped how big of a matchup this is or how big the rivalry is, or if they can't feel it yet. As we record this on Tuesday morning, I think certainly by the time the game comes or when you run in that stadium and you just see, all of those Texas and all of those Texas A&M fans just rocking in Kyle Field, you'll certainly get a sense very early on of how much this game means to so many people in the Lone Star State. In November 2011, I was 18 years old, right? I had took a semester off. I had graduated high school in May of 2011, and then I went to basic training in AIT for the Army Reserves, and so I was back home waiting to go to college. So I was 18 years old. I'm now 31, with a bachelor's and a master's. At that time, I hadn't even started college. So it's just been so long since these two teams have played. You talk about it all the time, that in the last matchup, Justin Tucker kicks the game-winning field goal, and he's gone on to have a Hall of Fame career in the National Football League since then, right? So long time between these two teams, but I don't think the passion in the rivalry has dipped at all. I get on Twitter every day. I've gotten on Twitter every day for years, and you see Texas fans and Texas A&M fans just arguing back and forth with no football played, right? I know they played in basketball. I know they played in baseball, but we know football will determine this rivalry, and there's been a lot of hate there for years, even without Texas and Texas A&M playing. How do A&M fans feel going into this rivalry game on Saturday against Texas?
Well, before I answer that, I think the funniest thing, my kind of welcome to this rivalry is when I started Locked On Aggies, about a year and a half ago, before Texas was even in the SEC. And I look at, in comments and I'm like, what are all these Texas fans doing here? We didn't even play you. And I'm like, well, there you go. You know what I mean? I just found that so funny. Like, here's these Texas fans. Now it makes more sense. But I was like, I get 7 comments a day from Texas fans and we don't even play them. But so I always found that hilarious, and it kind of tells you what you need to know about this rivalry. But heading into this game, like you said in previewing this, there's a lot to play for both of these teams. Texas A&M is still alive thanks to Oklahoma and Alabama in that game. They're still alive despite the losses to South Carolina and Auburn to make the SEC championship game. You're a win away against your biggest rival at home. I think that the vibes are high, which you'd be surprised the way you lost to Auburn. the vibes are high right now because this team and this staff and these fans know that this team is still playing for something. In year one under Elko, you're still playing for something. In Thanksgiving weekend, you're playing important football. And I don't think a lot of people would have expected that out of this Texas A&M fans. So there's a lot of excitement heading into this game. And I think Texas A&M fans really believe they can win this one.
Yeah, no, I think Texas A&M fans are excited. Thankfully, you still have something to play for because you look at it going into Saturday. Texas takes care of business against Kentucky. If Texas A&M takes care of business against Auburn, you set up one of the biggest games in this rivalry's history. You set up a winner gets into the SEC championship scenario. I mean, just flat out, right? Whoever wins that game on Saturday night will be there. And then what I like to say is in typical Aggie fashion, right? Whenever you start to believe in Texas A&M, whenever you start to hype them up, whenever you start to give them credit, whenever you think they've gotten over the hump, then you lose to Auburn in 4 overtimes. You drop the ball, literally. You drop the ball in the end zone when you have a chance to keep the game going. What happened against Auburn, and what gives you faith that this team can turn it around against a different beast, the Texas Longhorns, this Saturday? When you now lost, and I want to mention this, you've lost your last 2 conference games, right? After, I think starting off 5-0, you've lost to South Carolina and now lost to Auburn your last 2 conference games. So what gives you confidence? What happened against Auburn, and what gives you confidence that you can turn it around against Texas?
Looking at against Auburn, it's always scary when you hear the name Peyton Thorne and kicked your behind. When those 2 things come into one sentence, you've done something wrong. And that's what happened. I mean, Peyton Thorne, receivers were wide open. I mean, one of the touchdowns of Cam Coleman, I could have thrown and caught, and that's a dead serious statement. I mean, like the secondary just vanished. Auburn just threw the ball all over Texas A&M. So when you ask what gives me confidence about this game, I'll tell you this. Looking at the way the season's gone, A&M is not, and it's weird because Jimbo Fisher's gone, but they have not played great on the road. They dominated Florida kind of before Lagway dialed in. I'd be a lot more scared about that game if you played Florida, now. You dominate Florida on the road. You kind of look against Mississippi State, sneak out with a win, and then lose to South Carolina and Auburn. But you've been, aside from that Notre Dame game where Connor Rigman was your starter and he was, just putrid, you have been really good at home. I mean, you've beaten LSU. You've beaten Missouri. You've beaten 2 solid football teams at home in great environments. There's one thing, and once again, I was in Austin last weekend. It was my first time in Austin, and you can't take anything away from the atmosphere there. Incredible atmosphere at that Kentucky game, I thought. But, the atmosphere at Kyle Field is going to be electric. Electric. It's going to be awesome. That's what gives me, I'd say, confidence. I'll probably predict Texas to win this game. I'll be honest with you. I probably will when we get to that here in a little bit. But Texas A&M could win this game in front of this elite crowd. I think you can't say otherwise.
Yeah, I do have to remind you and the fans that the 12th man, as great as they are, they can't actually play on the field, right? You still got to line up 11 against 11. So we'll certainly see, what happens. I want to go ahead and get into the break and then come back. Actually, you know what? Before we get to the break, we can talk about this before we get to the break. Texas A&M, right? I believe Trey Zoon III. Is it Zoon? How do you say his name?
Yeah, Trey
He's
Zoon.
put some bulletin board material out there for the Texas Longhorns, and I don't normally, or necessarily believe in bulletin board material. I feel like this is the type of game where you're going to get up for it regardless, right? Yes. Texas A&M, if you need to hear some comments in the media to turn up for this game, then you're not ready for this matchup, right? But he's come out and he said some things about Anthony Hill, right? Anthony Hill's a great player, but he's not anything we haven't seen before, right? He's not anything we haven't dealt with, basically minimizing Anthony Hill, one of the best players in the country. And then he talked about the atmosphere that you talked about. He feels bad for Texas, right, and their players because they may not be ready for an environment like this. What are your thoughts? Do you like it, love it, or hate it that Trey Zoon has decided to come out and essentially poke the bear against the Texas Longhorns going into this matchup on Saturday?
I've always been anti that personally. And to me, there's 2 schools of thought to this, and it kind of depends on the type of athlete you are, competitor you are. I've always been in my playing career in sports. I was always well, I'm just gonna go out there and play. I'm not gonna say anything. Obviously, I'm not in front of media. That was you know what I mean. Like it's not like the same thing, but that's just how I took advantage of when I played sports. I just think you do that. You don't want to give another team the extra motivation. I agree with you. It's probably not really needed in this game, the bulletin board material, but it's now there. And some people are going to say, oh, come on, man. We love trash talk. And I'm all for it. I'm not saying I hate it. I just don't think that there's a reason to poke the bear. Go out there, respect your opponent, and show them on the field. That's kind of been my take on this. But I get the folks that say, heck yeah, it's a rivalry. We hate you. You hate us. Let's talk crap. I get both sides of it. But I personally am pro kind of staying away from it.
Yeah, I'm not advocating that Texas does it, but I do think in a game like this, like, why not lean into it, right? Best case scenario, you look like a genius. Worst case scenario, you lost, and then people just poke a little bit more fun at you, but they were already going to do that if you lost anyway. To me, these two teams hate each other, right? Yeah. You should. The fan bases hate each other. Go out there and talk a little bit of mess, right? The worst thing that can happen is you lose the game, and then they say, ha, 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 you were talking, and you lost the game. But I'm, a fan of, especially in games like this. Now, if it was Texas, Kentucky, or Texas, Florida, it's like just go out there and play. Texas A&M, lean into it. I'm all for it. A quick word from our sponsors, and then we get into the quarterback matchup. I think that's very key. Marcel Reed, Quinn Ewers. What do those two guys need to do to lead their respective teams to victory? We talk about that after the break. All right, today's episode of Locked on Longhorns and Locked on Aggies, this crossover is brought to you by Gametime, right? Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. If you're crazy and you haven't gotten your ticket yet for Texas A&M or Texas and you're still trying to go, the best place to get a ticket, you're still going to pay a lot of money, but it would be on the Gametime app. Once again, with those priority Gametime picks, it makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. All in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Seat views. Get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. The lowest price guarantee or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. And the Gametime ticket coverage, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime Picks. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, bringing Andrew Stefaniak back in. Once again, Locked on Longhorns, Locked on Aggies crossover ahead of the monumental Lone Star Showdown. Andrew, in your opinion, what do the Aggies need to see from Marcel Reed? What does Marcel Reed have to do this weekend to pull off the big upset of the University of Texas?
His legs have been consistent all year for the Aggies. When he's been playing, his legs have been solid. He's done a good job with his legs all year. It's been the accuracy throwing the football. And you've seen it slowly. You got to remember, he's a sophomore. He's not been around long. It's his second year at Texas A&M, second year in college football. Played one game last year, was the bowl game. He's only played a handful of college football games. It's not like this guy's a seasoned vet. He's still figuring things out as he goes. But he gets a little bit more confident throwing the football every single game, just a hair more confident. And he actually had a solid day throwing the football against Auburn. Obviously, the Aggies lose the game, but he throws. He was putting the football in some good spots. Had an ugly interception. Was he perfect? No. Were there some throws I would have liked for him to have had back? Of course. But he's getting a little bit more accurate game by game. His legs are going to be there. It's going to be a weapon. They're going to try and find a way to use that as much as they can. But if he can dial it in with his arm and be a little bit more accurate, that is when Texas A&M, I think, could give Texas a run for their money on Saturday.
Yeah, certainly. We'll see what type of performance, we get from Marcel Reed, like you said, a young quarterback, in a big moment like that. But I think that's where legacies are made, and certainly if he wins this game, he'll go down in Texas A&M history as one of the biggest wins in program history. Certainly, I think when you look at Quinn Ewers, it's interesting to me because he does have the mild ankle sprain now, right? Quinn Ewers has been in this type of environment. We've seen him play on the road at Michigan, play on the road at Alabama, conference championship games in the Big 12, playoff games. So he's been in these big environments, right? But now you're going into Kyle Field, maybe the toughest place he's ever played, right? Just talking about, this rivalry in the crowd. And he's not going to be 100%, I don't believe, with the mild ankle sprain last week. And so when you look at it, I think some of the issues at times with Quinn Ewers have been his consistency in terms of his footwork, moving up in the pocket, stepping into his throws, and really the mechanics of the quarterback position. I think sometimes because of his arm talent, I think sometimes, because of his natural talent, it's allowed him to get lazy but still make plays at the quarterback position. Well, when you look at it and you look at where, Texas A&M has struggled, especially in that South Carolina game, that was because Lenore Sellers was just making plays with his legs, being able to shake off tacklers, moving around, making plays on the run, and just kind of absolutely being a force multiplier against that Aggie defense. Where if you're talking about a quarterback who's already somewhat of a statue in the pocket, and now he's dealing with an ankle injury, it's going to be hard for him to move. And what I don't want to see, or what I hope doesn't happen, is we see the deer in headlights Georgia Quinn Ewers performance part 2, where Steve Sarkisian now has to wonder, okay, do I need to go to Arch Manning? Is Quinn Ewers giving me enough to win this game? Because when you look at that front four that Texas A&M can bring at you, when you look at Mike Elko's ability to dial it up, right? If Quinn Ewers is not at 100%, I do think that this Aggie defense, can get to Quinn Ewers, rattle him. And I think Quinn Ewers under pressure is a completely different quarterback. So I do think that it's a very interesting matchup where, 100% healthy, I think, if you look at Quinn Ewers and Marcel Reed, I'm taking Quinn Ewers all day. But like I said, with the mild ankle sprain coming into an environment like this against this defense and Mike Elko calling it, I do think that if he's not 100%, if he's not able to move and he's kind of giddish and, being kind of scared to move around and, kind of sped up a little bit, the Texas A&M defense might have an advantage there. Where do you think, or how do you think Mike Elko's defense will try to attack Sark's offense? Because I think they're two of the best in their craft at college football in terms of their respective sides of the ball.
It's going to be interesting looking at the way, I'll tell you what, Texas was moving people in the run game on Saturday. They were it felt like there were points in the game where they were going for 15 yards a carry. They were just moving people. Obviously, when you look at stats, the passing offense is better than the rushing attack right now for Texas. I believe Texas is 17th in college football in passing offense. So, if I'm Texas right now, if I am Sark, I am looking at this and I'm saying, look what, once again, I'm going to say this name again, Peyton Thorne just did to Texas A&M. And I am taking that and saying, we are going to throw it on them all day long. We are going to create downfield, explosive plays in the passing attack. But I think they're going to want to try and find a way to establish the run, because if you can establish the run against Texas A&M, and establishing the run, I don't even think it necessarily means it can mean 4 yards, 5 yards on runs, just to keep them on their toes. That will open things up in the passing attack. So if I'm Texas, I'm going to try and establish the run to then create open plays in the passing game. But if I'm Texas A&M, you've got to try and shut down this passing attack. And I think the way you do that is by getting pressure on, like you said, a banged up Quinn Ewers.
Right. And speaking of establishing the run, that's obviously something that Texas A&M wants to do at a high level. I'm not sure that Texas A&M can beat Texas in a passing matchup, right? Whether, Quinn Ewers is 100% or not. Now, I want to ask you, how big of a loss is not having a player like Le'Veon Moss in a game like this? But when I was getting ready for this game, I do see that there's a possibility that former Texas target Reuben Owens may make his season debut against the Texas Longhorns on Saturday. So what do you think, or what do you expect from this Texas A&M running game on Saturday? And like I said, how big of a loss is it not having a player like Le'Veon Moss in this game?
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously Texas understands, just like the Aggies now do, the losing some running backs. And, looking at you lose Ruben Owens for the season and you go, okay, well, it was kind of a 1A, 1B situation with Owens and Moss. Moss goes down. Daniels, to me, is a solid running back. I not on the same level as Le'Veon Moss. I think Moss was one of the better backs in the SEC. And you lose a great player for the rest of the year. And I mean, we saw it against Auburn. Auburn, like Texas, is a solid team against the run. I believe heading into last week, they were 12th. They've kind of dropped down to like 20th, Auburn did, when it comes to stopping the run. But once again, a top 25 team at stopping the run, and Texas A&M went for 3.2 yards a carry on like 52 carries. They couldn't get anything going on the ground. A long carry for the day, 9 yards. There was no explosiveness. They were feeding Amari Daniels, and he didn't look great. I'm worried about it because here's the joke. Colin Klein's going to run the football. And if you ain't doing anything with it, you aren't winning this football game. Ruben Owens, here's my thing. I have a weird suspicion you're going to see him out there. He just kind of posted like a uh-oh type of thing on Twitter. But let's call a spade a spade. There's no way they give him more than 10 carries in his first game of the season. I don't – let's say he plays, right? I don't see him getting more than that. So I think it'd be great to have him. Maybe he gives you a little spark here and there, but they're not going to let him come back from this, off-season procedure and go, here's 25 carries. That's just not going to happen. So I don't see that playing a massive role, even if he is out there on Saturday.
Yeah, for sure. Like you said, maybe, come in some packages, give him the ball, 5 to 10 times, but hard to see, your first game of the season really being featured, and him being a huge impact in this game. But it would be good, like I said, as a former Texas target, somebody who just follows Texas high school football, to see Ruben Owens back on the field. Obviously, you don't want to see anybody hurt, and anybody missing a significant portion of time during their college career. All right, another word from our sponsors, and then we get into what is a win? What would a win mean for Texas A&M? What would a win mean for Texas? And then our score predictions for the return of the Lone Star Showdown after the break. All right, this Locked On crossover, Locked On Longhorns, Locked On Aggies, also brought to you by FanDuel. Get in the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook right now. New customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the National Football League all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. All right, bringing Andrew Stefaniak back in. Like we mentioned earlier in the broadcast, these teams have continued to play in the other sports, right? Basketball, baseball, softball, all of that. They've continued to play in the other sports. But we know that the bragging rights, just the juice, everything about this rivalry will now and moving forward be determined by what happens on the football field once a year. And then maybe, if they play again in the SEC championship, that's certainly possible, maybe not this year, but just, moving forward. But the, bragging rights in this rivalry will be determined by what happens on the football field. What would a win for Texas A&M mean to that program in this game?
Well, I mean, what you're trying to avoid right now is, and Texas A&M fans, cover your ears, you don't want to be called the little brother. I mean, look at the all-time record here. You're 33-61 against Texas all time. And 3. You tied a few times. Great. But you right now are in that conversation. Now, you've done well recently on the baseball field, but once again, who cares? I care. People care. I don't want to take away from the baseball team. Let me step that back. What I'm saying is, what at the end of the day, the rivalry that's going to matter most within these two schools is this football game. This is your opportunity. You're at home. You're at home against Texas. Rivalry's back. Tickets are $1,000. Everything that's going on here with a chance to go play in your first ever SEC championship game on the line and to keep your, arch nemesis out of said SEC championship game while propelling yourself in it. There's so much on the line for this program. And I mean, I'm a Mike Elko guy. I'm a believer. I think that he is the answer. I really do. I think he is the exact opposite of what Jimbo Fisher was, which is exactly what Texas A&M needed. So I think the future's bright for Texas A&M and Mike Elko. But if you can find a way in year one under him to go to the SEC championship, well, at the same time, knocking Texas out of said SEC championship, which in a weird way could end up maybe being okay for Texas when it comes to playoff seeding. That's beside the point. It would be huge for your program and for this fan base.
Yeah, I think when you look at it for Texas, I think it's kind of the same, but on the opposite, right? I think Texas getting this win against, Texas A&M, even though they may not need the confirmation, I think it's confirmation that, Texas A&M is little brother. Like Texas, this is confirmation that Texas is the flagship program in the state. Then if you win this game, you're locked into the SEC championship game in your first year in the conference, when a lot of people said that you would not be ready, right? And I know, insert schedule jokes in the comments, but a lot of people said that you would not be ready for the conference this year, right? And so I do think that this win against Texas A&M, it may mean more to A&M than to Texas. It may just be business as usual if Texas goes in there and wins on Saturday. But I do think this win putting you in the SEC championship game, this win getting you another win over A&M after not playing them for 13 years after they ran to the SEC, like I said earlier, would just be confirmation that it's not 1A and 1B. It's Texas, and then it's Texas A&M. Andrew, who wins this game and why?
People are going to hate me. I'm going to take Texas to win this game. I have been, as much as it's pained me, a pro Texas guy. And I'm a straight shooter. I'm not going to sit here and say what I don't think just to, I'm going to be honest. I've been a big Texas guy all year long. I think Texas is a really, really good football team. I think this is a tight game. I'm not going to sit here and say Texas wins by 3 touchdowns. I think Texas wins this game. I think it's going to be a bit of an ugly one. I see Texas winning this game like 27-24 in a really, really tight football. Was that the exact same score? Oh, no, it was 27-25 last time they played. I see it being a tight game like that. I think Texas is going to find a way to win. But I'm telling you this. I will say this. Texas A&M, they're going to win this game some here. I mean, Texas, they're going to win this game some over the next 10 years. I think this is going to be closer to 500 than people expect it to be right now over the next 10 years. But right now, I think Texas wins this one in College Station.
Yeah, I think when you look at this game, what I'm most confident in really in terms of every unit between these two teams is there's one unit that has shown up every week regardless of the opponent, and that is the Texas defense, right? Especially that Texas pass defense. And you've talked about how Marcel Reed can struggle in the passing game, and where A&M might have an advantage against any team is just their ability to kind of run it down your throat and be creative on offense. But I do think, like I said, this Texas defense has shown up week in and week out. There has been times where they've given up something in the run game, but I think they'll bow down, step up to the occasion in this type of matchup. And I don't think that Marcel Reed will have much success being able to pass the ball against arguably the best pass defense in the country, a team that has forced turnovers in their first 11 games of the season. I think they make it 12 against Texas A&M, and I think the offense will be able to make enough plays against a very stout defense. Like I said, I don't think they're going to put up 40 points or, 38 points, but you saw the way that they ran the ball against Kentucky, coming off a game with 251 rushing yards, a lot of momentum. I think they're able to do that. And I think Quinn Ewers is healthy enough, and Steve Sarkisian dialing it up. You have enough weapons on the outside to make plays and push the ball down the field offensively. But I'm really confident where I'm laying my hat on is this Texas defense that's been one of the best defenses in the country all year. I think they caused Marcel Reed and that offense enough problems, and Texas scores enough points to get out of there with the win. But like you said, I think it's a close game. It may come down to a go-ahead drive where Texas wins it at the end. But nonetheless, Texas will get their second consecutive win in this rivalry, albeit 13 years later, against the Texas A&M Aggies. Jonathan Davis from Locked On Longhorns, Andrew Stefaniak from Locked On Aggies, previewing the return of the Lone Star Showdown. Once again, the biggest games in college football, one of the biggest games in college football is back. Can't wait for Saturday. Thank you all for tuning in once again on the Aggie side, the Longhorn side, and this is something we'll be bringing to you once a year. The Lone Star Showdown is back.